The ice rain tapped a frantic, meaningless code against the panoramic windows of our bedroom, as if trying to elicit a response from the perfect, glossy world Marcus had built for us. 7 years ago, had said he loved my unobtrusive elegance, and I, fool that I was, had mistaken it for a compliment instead of the life sentence it was. Today, on the morning of our anniversary, I found not a sapphire ring, not tickets to Venice, but the receipt from last night's dinner. In the margin, in his precise architect's script, was written, "Client Entertainment, J. Harrington. Discuss zoning variance. Our anniversary dinner. A tax deduction." I stood in the silent, minimalist kitchen, the cold marble island under my palms, and felt nothing. Not anger, not sorrow. A great, yawning void where my heart used to be. The final, definitive audit of my marriage had arrived, and the balance was zero. I had become an expert in the archaeology of Marcus affection, sifting through the scant, fossilized remains for proof it had ever existed. We met at a gallery opening. He was discussing the structural integrity of the building with the curator I was admiring, a chaotic, beautiful abstract piece, all violent slashes of crimson and gold. "Interesting," had said, standing beside me. "But where's the function? The logic?" I laughed, saying maybe its function was to make you feel. Had looked at me then, really looked as if I were a novel but impractical design. "Feelings are poor foundations," had replied, but had asked for my number anyway. I was a freelance illustrator, my world one of intuition and color. His was one of lines, load-bearing walls, and impeccable logic. I mistook our difference for symbiosis. For 7 years, I tried to build a life on his foundation. I muted my colors. I learned to appreciate clean lines and empty space. Our home was a testament to his vision. A stunning, glass and steel cliffside masterpiece that felt more like a museum than a sanctuary. Every object had its ordained place, including me. I was the living sculpture that softened the edges, the curated piece that added just enough warmth to be inviting, but not enough to disturb the composition. My studio, once a sun-drenched room full of canvases and dreams, was quietly repurposed into a guest room after the first year. Its better utilization of space, Marcus had said, kissing my temple. "You can sketch at the kitchen table." And so I did, my large, messy dreams shrinking to fit on the corner of a cold marble surface. The receipt was merely the latest in a long line of small erasures, but it was the totality of them. The way had gifted me cashmere sweaters in shades of gray, more sophisticated than my beloved emerald greens. The way had finished my sentences, not with intimacy, but with correction, as if my original thought was a flawed draft. The way our lovemaking had become a silent, efficient transaction, as scheduled and predictable as his dental cleanings. I was drowning in a sea of impeccable taste, and no one could hear me gasping for air. The day of the receipt, I didn't cry. I performed. I put on the gray cashmere, made his espresso, and smiled as he left for the site of his latest triumph, a corporate spire downtown. The moment the door side shut, the performance ended. The silence in the house was absolute. I wandered to the vast living room window and watched the Pacific Ocean, gray and heaving, match my internal tumult. A plan, cold and clear as the glass before me, formed, not a plan for confrontation, but for survival. I would not scream. I would not plead. I would simply step out of the frame. It began with a lie. A small, simple one. In joining a life drawing class, I told him that evening to keep my skills sharp. Tuesday nights, had nodded over his tablet, scanning financial reports. Goat, a structured hobby, whose teaching, a professor from the community college, I invented. Robert, a solid, unassuming name, he approved. Structure was good. The following Tuesday, I did drive to the community college. I sat in my car for 20 minutes in the rain-slicked parking lot, my heart hammering. Then I drove past it, into the older, messier part of the city, where buildings had character and flaws. I parked outside a place called the Hollow Cellar, a bar I'd passed once and noted because its glowing sign was shaped like a fractured heart. It was the antithesis of everywhere Marcus would be. It was all dark wood, scuffed floors, and the low thrum of conversation punctuated by the clink of glasses, and the occasional burst of real, unfettered laughter. I took a stool at the end of the bar, feeling like an imposter in my expensive, silent clothes. I ordered a whiskey, something I never drank just to have a prop. I was about to leave, the weight of my own absurdity crushing me, when the door opened, letting in a gust of wet night air and a man. He was tall, with the kind of build that spoke of practical strength rather than gym-honed vanity. His dark hair was tousled from the wind and rain, and he wore a leather jacket that looked lived in, over a faded band t-shirt for a group I vaguely recognized. He had a kind, tired face, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, but a quiet intensity in his gaze. He didn't scan the room, he seemed to absorb it. His eyes landed on me, alone at the bar, and for a fraction of a second they held mine. There was no appraisal, no pickup artist gleam, just a faint, acknowledging curiosity, as if had noticed an interesting shadow in the corner of a room. He took a seat a few stools down, ordered a beer, and pulled out a small, battered sketchbook from his jacket. He began to draw, his focus absolute, his hand moving with a swift, sure grace. I was mesmericated. Here was a man in a noisy bar, making art. Not for a client, not for a grade, just because it was the most authentic thing I'd witnessed in years. My whiskey arrived. I took a sip, the fire of it shocking my system. I must have made a sound, a cough, a gasp, because he looked up. A small smile touched his lips. Not a whiskey drinker, he observed, his voice a warm, low baritone that cut easily through the ambient noise. Is it that obvious? I managed, my voice unfamiliar to my own ears. The way you're looking at it suggests a relationship of deep mistrust, he said, the smile widening. I'm Gabriel. Clara, I said. The name felt like a secret. Well, Clara, can I recommend the Pinot Noir? It's surprisingly unterrible. This place has many virtues, but their whiskey selection is not among them. And just like that, we were talking. He was a woodworker, a craftsman who made custom furniture and musical instruments. He spoke about the soul of different woods, the warmth of cherry, the stubbornness of oak, the singing quality of spruce. He showed me a page from his sketchbook, not a drawing of the bar, but an intricate, beautiful design for a rocking chair, the curves flowing like a captured wave. For a new grandmother, he said. She wanted something that would feel like a hug. The simplicity of that purpose to create a hug out of wood nearly ended me. My work had become about aligning brand identities and maximizing visual impact. I'd forgotten about hugs. I told him I was an illustrator. He didn't ask about my clients or my income. He asked, what do you love to draw when no one's paying you? The question was a key turning in a long-rusted lock. Birds, I heard myself say. In flight, the impossible physics of them, the freedom, his green eyes held mine. That's a good thing to love, he said softly. I stayed for 2 hours. We talked about music, about the terrible mural on the bar's back wall, about the best place in the city to watch a storm roll in. He listened the way an artist observes a subject with total, respectful absorption, seeing the light and the shadow. He made me feel interesting, not as an accessory, but as a primary source. When I finally glanced at my watch, a bolt of panic shot through me. Marcus would be home. I have to go, I said, fumbling for my wallet. Let me, Gabriel said, placing a hand over mine briefly. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure and mediated sensation. You can get the next one. If you come back, I have class next Tuesday, I said, the line now serving a new, thrilling purpose. Then I'll hope for terrible weather, he smiled. It's always better in here when it rains. The drive home was a blur. I entered the cold, silent house, my skin still humming from the warmth of the bar. The sound of his voice, the brief touch of his hand. Marcus was in his study, on a conference call. He waved absent-mindedly as I passed. I stood under the scalding spray of the shower, trying to wash away the scent of beer and wood smoke and possibility, but it was inside me now. That Tuesday became my anchor. My double life began not with a grand passion, but with a slow, persistent thawing. Each week, I went to the hollow cellar. Sometimes Gabriel was there. Sometimes he wasn't. When he was, we talked. We established a ritual. He would have a glass of the unterrible Pinot Noir waiting for me. We shared fragments of our lives. I gave him the edited, sanitized version. A husband in high-pressure development, a quiet life. He spoke of a previous relationship that had ended amicably when she wanted to travel the world, and he wanted to root deeper into his workshop. I'm a man who needs to put down roots, Head said, running a thumb over the water ring on the wooden bar. Some people are wanderers. I'm a planter. After a month, he invited me to see his workshop. It was a risk, a line crossed from chance encounters to deliberate intention. I took it. The workshop was in a converted warehouse, space he shared with a potter and a glassblower. It was chaos incarnate, a glorious, fragrant chaos of sawdust, citrus-scented oil, and creativity. Half-finished tables stood beside intricate marquetry projects. A guitar neck was clamped in a vise. Sketches were pinned haphazardly to every available surface. Sun streamed in through high, dusty windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced like frantic, happy spirits. This is alive, I breathed, my artist's soul stirring from its deep slumber. It's a mess, he laughed, but it's my mess. He showed me his current project, a dining table for a family of 6, made from a single massive slab of black walnut. He was sculpting the live edge, preserving the tree's natural contours. See here, he said, his finger tracing a deep, burrowed knot. The client wanted it sanded flat. But this is the tree's story, its scar, its character. Why would I erase that? His words struck me with the force of a physical blow. Why would I erase that? I had spent 7 years letting Marcus sand me flat, erase my knots and burls, my wild grain, to fit a sleek, modern design. That was the day he first kissed me. It wasn't dramatic. I was running my hand over the satin-smooth finish of the walnut, feeling the story beneath my palms when I looked up and found him watching me, an unreadable expression on his face. The air between us, thick with sawdust and sunlight, seemed to crystallize. You have good hands, he said quietly. An artist's hands. They see as well as touch. I didn't know who moved first. All I knew was that suddenly, his lips were on mine, and the world, for the first time in a decade, made perfect sense. The kiss was not a taking, it was an offering. It was deep and slow, and tasted of coffee and honesty. It was a homecoming to a self I'd abandoned. I kissed him back with a hunger that shocked us both, my fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer as if I could absorb his solid, real warmth into my marrow. From that point, the affair bloomed with the fierce, rapid growth of something long suppressed. It was not just physical, though that aspect was a revelation, a clumsy, laughing, passionate exploration that stood in stark contrast to the silent, functional mechanics of my marital bed. With Gabriel, sex was a conversation, a collaboration, often ending in shared laughter or profound, wordless peace as we lay tangled in his sheets in the loft above the workshop. The city lights a distant galaxy below. More importantly, it was creative. He cleared a corner of his workshop for me. Your studio, he said, presenting me with a second-hand drafting table. I began to draw again, not for clients, for me. I drew birds in flight. I drew the curve of his shoulder as he worked. I drew the wild, free lines I'd spent years suppressing. He would look at my work and point to a single, powerful line. There, he'd say, that's the truth of it. That's the feeling. He became my conspirator in joy. We spent Saturdays exploring flea markets, where he'd find a discarded tool with good bones and I'd find a tattered book of bird illustrations. We cooked simple, messy meals in his small kitchen, the windows steaming up with warmth. He played guitar, old folk songs, his voice rough but tender. I felt myself expanding, filling out the outlines of the woman I was supposed to be. My colors returning, vibrant and unapologetic. Back in the Cliffside Museum, I became a master forger of normalcy. I used Marcus' own inattention as my greatest tool. My class ran later. I took on out-of-town clients. I cultivated a serene, slightly distant demeanor that he interpreted as contentment. The guilt was a phantom limb, sometimes a sharp ache, often just a vague absence. But when I weighed it against the slow death of my spirit in my marriage, the scales tipped irrevocably. I was not betraying a loving partner. I was saving myself from a politely administered euthanasia. The cracks, of course, began to show. A scent of sandalwood on my skin, Gabriel's soap. A newfound confidence in my opinions that Marcus found unsettling. A receipt for artist-grade charcoal I'd left in my coat pocket. He'd find it, hold it up. This is for your class. The pause was a landmine. Yes, I'd say, meeting his gaze evenly, the line out familiar armor. Life drawing requires good materials. He'd stare, his architect's mind sensing a design flaw it couldn't yet quantify. Our interactions became a cold war of subtle audits. How was Robert, the professor? He'd ask, testing the foundation of my lie. Inspiring, I'd reply, layering truth into the deception. The inevitable collapse came from an unexpected unexpected direction. Marcus, in a rare fit of what he probably called spousal engagement, decided we should attend a charity gala for the city's arts council. It was exactly the sort of event I used to dread a sea of polite conversation and strategic networking. Now, armed with my secret life, I felt a detached amusement. I wore a dress of deep blue, a color Gabriel said matched the sky just before twilight. Marcus approved. A good choice. Authoritative. The gala was held in a modern art museum. We were milling through a cocktail hour in a sculpture garden when I saw him. Gabriel. He was across the room, talking animatedly with a group near a towering metal installation. He wore a simple, well-cut navy suit, looking utterly unlike himself and yet completely at ease. My heart stopped, then sprinted. He was here, in my world. The collision of my two universes was so visceral I felt dizzy. Marcus followed my gaze. "Do you know that man?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "I think has the woodworker who did the table for the Hastings project," I lied swiftly, citing one of Marcus' firm's recent residential jobs. "I saw his portfolio online, HMM. Good craftsmanship is hard to find," Marcus said, already losing interest. "Get me a mineral water, would you?" As I moved toward the bar, a path cleared, and Gabriel's eyes found mine. The shock in them mirrored my own. Then, something else. A slow, dawning understanding, and a pain so acute it was like a physical wound on his face. Had seen Marcus. Had seen the world I came from. He gave me the faintest, almost imperceptible nod, a message of solidarity, of shared secrecy before turning back to his conversation. The rest of the evening was a special kind of torture. Every laugh I heard, I wondered if it was his. Every glimpse of navy in the crowd made my breath catch. Marcus, for once, was attentive, introducing me to associates, his hand a possessive weight on the small of my back. The touch felt like a brand. I managed to slip away to the restroom. As I stood in the stark, white-lit silence, the door opened and Gabriel stepped inside. He locked it behind him. For a moment, we just stared at each other, to ghosts in a palace of mirrors. "Clara," he said, my name a sigh. "Gabriel, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "Is that him?" he interrupted, his voice rough. "The architect." I nodded, tears threatening. "It's not what you think. It's a business arrangement. A quiet, lonely tomb. You're the only real thing in my life." He crossed the space into strides, pulling me to him. He didn't hiss me. He just held me, his face buried in my hair. "I know," he murmured. "I knew it was something like that. The way you talked about your quiet life. The way you flinched at loud noises. God, Clara." He pulled back, cupping my face. "This is killing me. Seeing you here with him in this museum. You belong in a forest, not a display case." "I'm trying to get out," I whispered desperately. "It's a process. There are assets, lawyers. I'm not asking you to run away tonight," he said, his thumb wiping away a tear. "I'm just telling you I see you, and am here. However long it takes." He kissed my forehead, a benediction. "Now go, before someone misses you." I returned to Marcus, my composure hanging by a thread. He glanced at me. "You're pale. The canapes must be off." 2 days later, the dam broke. It was a Sunday. Marcus was reviewing blueprints at the kitchen island. I was supposed to be at a life drawing marathon. I was packing my bag, not with charcoal, but with a change of clothes for an afternoon with Gabriel at the coast. "This class seems exceptionally demanding," Marcus said, not looking up from his plans. "It's an intensive course," I replied, my standard deflection. "Robert must be a remarkable teacher to inspire such dedication." He finally looked up, his gaze cold and forensic. "I called the community college today, Clara, to see about enrolling a junior associate in a class to support the arts." The floor fell away. I stood, frozen, my bag in my hand. "They have no life drawing class on Tuesday nights. They have no professor named Robert in their fine arts department." He stood up slowly, a predator uncoiling. "So, where do you go?" All the lies, the careful constructions, evaporated. In their place rose a towering, furious truth. I was tired. So tired of hiding. "I go to live," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "I go to a place where I don't have to be a shadow. I go to be with someone who sees me, who who hears me, who doesn't need me to be quiet and elegant and unobtrusive. His face went from cold to icy. You're having an affair. It was an accusation, but it sounded almost clinical. You had an affair first, I shouted, the sound foreign in the quiet room. With your work, with your ambition, with your perfect, empty life. You checked out of this marriage years ago, Marcus. You just left your shell behind. My affair was just me finally walking out of your empty house. He slammed his hand on the marble. Who is he? That craftsman from the gala? I knew it. The way you looked at him. Yes, I said, defiant, relieved to say it. Has a man, not a blueprint. He has sawdust under his nails and music in his soul. And he loves the parts of me you've spent 7 years trying to delete. The unraveling was swift and ugly. He spewed venom about ingratitude, about the lifestyle had provided, about the scandal. He threatened to leave me with nothing. I stood and absorbed it, a strange calm settling over me. His anger was a storm against a cliff I was no longer standing on. Take it, I said quietly when he paused for breath. Take the house, the cars, the investments. Take every perfect, cold thing in this museum. I don't want any of it. I just want my freedom and my soul back. I picked up my bag, the one packed for the coast, and walked to the door. He was silent now, stunned by my indifference to the weapons he'd brandished. I turned at the threshold. The receipt, Marcus. For our anniversary. Client entertainment. That was the final draft. You drew the plans for this ending yourself. Then I left. I didn't slam the door. I closed it softly, the way one closes the cover on a book they will never read again. I drove straight to Gabriel's workshop. It was raining again. He was at his bench, painstakingly inlaying a mother-of-pearl fragment into the headstock of a guitar. He looked up as I entered, soaked and shaking. He didn't ask a single question. He just stood, opened his arms, and I walked into them, crumbling against his solid chest, finally allowing the tears to come, tears of grief, of relief, of terrifying, exhilarating freedom. He held me until the storm inside me passed. Then he made tea, set me on his worn sofa, and wrapped a rough wool blanket around my shoulders. Tell me, he said, and I did. I told him everything. The receipt, the years of silence, the confrontation. He listened, his hands steady around mine. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. What do you need? He finally asked. Not what now, or what about us. Just what do you need? I need to not be a secret anymore, I whispered. He smiled, that warm, whole-face smile that had first drawn me in. You haven't been a secret to me since the night you mistrusted that whiskey. The divorce was a protracted, bitter affair, just as Marcus promised. His lawyers were sharks. Mine, a fierce woman I found through a friend of Gabriel's, was a barracuda. I held firm to my one demand. A clean, fast break. I signed away my rights to the cliffside house, to the investments, to everything that represented my old life. I took only the money that was legally mine from before the marriage, and my personal effects. It was a fraction of what I could have fought for, but it was the price of my sanity, and I paid it gladly. The final hearing was on a bright, sunny day. Marcus looked thinner, older, the perfect lines of his face etched with a bitterness he couldn't control. As the judge finalized the dissolution, his eyes met mine across the courtroom. They held no love and no regret, only a profound, uncomprehending loss. He had lost an asset, a component of his design, and he could not fathom why it had chosen to walk away. Outside, the world was loud and bright and gloriously imperfect. Gabriel was waiting on the courthouse steps, leaning against his old truck. He wasn't holding flowers. He was holding a small, flat package wrapped in brown paper. A divorce gift, he said, handing it to me. I unwrapped it. It was a woodblock print. Had carved it himself. The image was of a bird, wings outstretched in powerful, dynamic flight, breaking free from a cage of intricate, beautiful but rigid geometric lines. At the bottom, in tiny letters, it read, "For Clara, already airborne." I looked from the print to his face, my vision blurring with happy tears. He took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine, his palm rough and real and warm. "Where to?" he asked. I looked at the sky, vast and blue and endless. "Anywhere," I said. "Everywhere, home." And as we drove away from the courthouse, from the museum of my old life, I knew it was true. Home wasn't a place on a cliff. It was a feeling. It was the smell of sawdust and honesty, the sound of a low laugh in a dim bar, the freedom of a blank page and a full heart. It was the hand holding mine, not to possess, but to anchor. I was no longer the quiet wife. I was the woman who had finally found her voice and the courage to use it to sing her own wild, imperfect, and breathtakingly beautiful song.